The airport was loud, busy, and full of people rushing to catch their flights. At Gate 22, the airline crew stood near the check-in counter, smiling at some passengers and ignoring others. A tall man in his 40s walked quietly to the gate. He wore a plain black jacket, jeans, and old sneakers. His beard was neat, but his face looked tired. He held an old brown backpack in one hand and a boarding pass in the other. When the gate agent looked at his ticket, she raised an eyebrow. "First class?" she said, almost laughing. "Are you sure this is your seat, sir?" The man nodded and gave a small smile. "Yes." She looked him up and down, clearly not believing him, but she said nothing more and waved him through. Inside the plane, the first-class section was full of rich travelers. Some wore designer clothes, some had gold watches. The cabin smelled like expensive perfume. The man quietly walked to seat 14C and placed his bag under the seat. He didn't say a word. He just sat down, buckled his seatbelt, and closed his eyes. A young flight attendant named Clara walked by and noticed him. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor as she stopped. "Excuse me, sir," she said, frowning. "I think you're in the wrong seat. This is a premium seat." The man opened his eyes and handed her the boarding pass. She looked at it, blinked twice, and gave a fake smile. "Oh, I see. My mistake." But her voice was cold. She turned around and walked to the back of the cabin. Another flight attendant was pouring drinks. "Did you see the guy in 14C?" Clara whispered. "Looks like he should be flying in the cargo hold, not first class." The other attendant laughed. "Maybe he won a free ticket or something." Passengers nearby heard them. Some chuckled, others shook their heads. One man took a photo of the quiet passenger and texted it to someone. "This guy's in first class. Can you believe it?" The man in 14C didn't say anything. He stared out the window, watching the workers load luggage onto the plane. The engines started. The safety instructions played. The plane took off smoothly into the sky, but the jokes didn't stop. Clara walked by with a tray of drinks. When she reached seat 14C, she paused. "Would you like water or juice?" she asked, still in a fake, polite voice. "Water, please," the man said quietly. She gave it to him, then turned and rolled her eyes as she walked away. The man sipped his water slowly. He didn't react. He didn't speak. He just sat quietly. One child sitting across the aisle stared at him. The child's mother leaned over and whispered, "Don't stare, honey. That man doesn't belong here." Still, the man said nothing. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small old notebook. The cover was faded. The pages looked worn. He opened it slowly and began reading. He turned each page with care, as if the book was precious. On one page was a small photo of a woman holding a baby. He stared at it for a long time. Somewhere in the back of the plane, a man sneezed loudly. A baby cried. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, ignoring seat 14C. But then, the plane shook. It was only for a second, but it was enough to make people gasp. Turbulence. A voice came on the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are passing through some light turbulence. Please keep your seatbelts on." The shaking stopped, but the mood in the cabin changed. People were nervous. A few rows back, a small boy started crying loudly. His mother looked helpless. The boy kept screaming, scared by the sudden shake. Flight. Attendants passed by but didn't help. Then the man in seat 14C stood up slowly. He walked toward the boy. "Excuse me?" he said gently. "May I try?" The mother looked at him, unsure, but something in his eyes made her nod. The man knelt next to the boy and spoke in a soft, calm voice. He pulled a small toy from his pocket, a paper bird, folded perfectly. He made it flap its wings. The boy stopped crying and stared. The man smiled and handed him the bird. "See? The plane is just dancing with the clouds," he said. The boy giggled. The entire cabin watched in silence. Clara, standing near the front, saw everything. Her face changed, just a little. She said nothing. The man returned to his seat. Again, he said nothing more. But now people looked at him differently. They were curious. Who was this man? Why did he have so much calm? He didn't dress like a rich man. He didn't act like a powerful person. But his silence was not weak. It was strong. Somewhere near the back, a passenger whispered, "He's not normal. There's something about him." The man opened his notebook again and wrote something in it, a single sentence. Then he closed it, leaned back, and closed his eyes. The plane flew smoothly above the clouds. The man in seat 14C stayed quiet. But his silence had started something, and no one knew just how much it would change before the flight ended. The man in seat 14C had done something small, but powerful. He calmed a crying child when no one else cared to help. After that moment, the plane became quiet. People stopped laughing. Some stared at him with surprise. Others looked away, unsure of what to think, but not everyone had changed. Flight attendant Clara stood in the galley with her arms crossed. She was still annoyed. "I don't care who he helped," she said to another crew member. "He still doesn't belong in first class. Look at him. No watch, no shoes worth more than $20. He probably used someone else's ticket." The other flight attendant laughed quietly. "Maybe he's some quiet farmer. Lost his way into luxury." They laughed behind their hands. Nearby passengers overheard and smiled too. But the man in 14C didn't react. He had opened his notebook again and was quietly writing something. His pen moved slowly as if every word mattered. One man, sitting across from him, leaned over and tried to sneak a peek. He could only see a few words on the page. "They judge what they see, not what they know." The man leaned back, confused. More passengers began whispering. "Do you think he's someone important?" "Nah. Probably just one of those quiet types. Strange, though. He doesn't even check his phone. Who does that on a flight like this?" Clara walked past him again, this time offering snacks. She smiled at the other passengers, warm and polite. But when she got to seat 14C, her smile faded. "We're out of the better options," she said flatly. "You can have this granola bar." She handed it to him without looking at his face. The man took it and gave a small nod. "Thank you." But just before Clara walked away, he looked up at her. "Kindness is free," he said softly. "But some people forget to carry it." She froze for a second, then walked away without saying a word. The cabin went quiet again. A woman in business class walked past first class on her way to the restroom. She stopped, staring at seat 14C. Her eyes went wide. She stepped closer. "Excuse me," she said slowly. "Is your name Mr. Alim Shah?" The man looked up from his notebook. "Yes," she gasped. "Oh my God!" Clara and the other flight attendant turned quickly. "You know him?" someone asked. The woman nodded slowly, her voice shaking. "He's the CEO of Skycore Industries. He's one of the richest and smartest people in the country, maybe the world." A silence fell over the plane. Every eye turned toward seat 14C, the same man who was mocked, ignored, treated like a nobody. He was now known. Clara's mouth opened slightly. She couldn't speak. Her face turned pale. The passengers looked at each. Other in disbelief. "No way. I saw a photo of him once in a business magazine. He's a billionaire, but he looks normal." A teenage girl whispered, "He's the man who helped the crying kid?" Everything changed in a single moment. Clara stepped back slowly. Her hands were shaking. The man, Mr. Alim Shah, closed his notebook gently. He looked at the woman and nodded. "Thank you for remembering me. Not many do." The woman looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't recognize you." He smiled kindly. "That's all right. Most people don't." The tension in the cabin was thick. Clara took a deep breath and walked away, too ashamed to face him. Passengers began whispering again, but now with respect. Their eyes were wide, their expressions full of guilt. The man who had said nothing now had everyone's attention, and yet he still stayed quiet, still calm, still humble. But deep inside, everyone knew something big had just begun. The news spread through the cabin like fire. He's the CEO of Skycore, a billionaire, sitting in economy clothes. We mocked him. Passengers began whispering nervously. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy with guilt. Mr. Alim Shah, the man in seat 14C, sat quietly. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look surprised. He just folded his notebook, placed it in his bag, and leaned back in his seat like nothing had happened. But the eyes around him had changed. Now, they were full of fear, of shame, of curiosity. Clara, the flight attendant who had mocked him, stood frozen in the galley. Her hands shook slightly. As she poured coffee for a passenger, she dropped the cup. It hit the floor and shattered. Her coworker looked at her. "You okay?" Clara didn't answer. A man from the front row walked down the aisle and stopped next to 14C. He was in his 50s, wore a suit, and had a confident smile. "Mr. Shaw," he said loudly, "it's an honor. I'm David Miller, Miller Tech Group." Mr. Shaw nodded slightly. "Hello. I've been trying to get a meeting with your office for months," David said. "Maybe we can talk during the flight?" Mr. Shaw smiled. "This is my rest time. I don't mix business with silence." David's face dropped. "Of course. I understand." He walked away quickly, embarrassed. The woman from business class who had recognized him was still standing nearby. "You helped my father once," she said softly. "Years ago. You gave him a job when no one else would." Mr. Shaw looked at her gently. "I remember. He was kind. He just needed a chance." She smiled and nodded, tears in her eyes. A little boy who had been watching from across the aisle whispered to his mother, "He's like a real-life superhero." Mr. Shaw heard the boy and gave him a small wink. Then, something strange happened. A red light flashed above. A voice came over. The speaker. "Attention crew, we've received an alert from the cockpit. One of the engines is showing a technical error. Please stay calm. We are in contact with ground control." Gasps filled the cabin. Passengers started to panic. A baby started crying again. Clara ran to the front of the cabin, pale and shaking. "Mr." Shaw didn't move. He calmly stood up and walked toward the back of the plane. A passenger stopped him. "Where are you going?" "To help," he said simply. He knocked on the cockpit door. Clara ran to him. "Sir, you can't—" He turned to her. "I helped build this plane. I designed the system that's giving that alert. Let me speak to—" "The pilot!" The other flight attendant looked shocked. "You built this?" Mr. Shaw nodded. "Skycore supplies the flight AI and diagnostics. I know the code better than anyone." Clara stepped back. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The pilot opened the door slightly. "Mr. Shaw?" "Yes," he said calmly. "Show me the error." The pilot led him inside. The door closed. Everyone sat in silence. For minutes, no one moved. Then the speaker turned on again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. The alert was a false signal due to a minor sensor glitch. Thanks to Mr. Shaw's help, we've cleared it. There is no danger. Please remain seated." The cabin burst into quiet applause. Mr. Shaw returned to seat 14C. He looked calm, peaceful. Clara stood nearby, frozen. Passengers stared at him with something new in their eyes. Respect. He had not shouted. He had not argued. He had been mocked, ignored, and judged. But when the moment came, he stood up and saved them all. And this was only the beginning. The tension was gone. The danger had passed. But something heavy still hung in the air. Not fear. Guilt. Clara stood in the aisle, holding a tray of untouched drinks. Her hands trembled. She had laughed at him, ignored him, treated him like he was less than nothing. And now, the whole plane knew who he really was. She slowly walked toward seat 14C, her steps slow and unsure. Mr. Alam Shah looked up as she approached. "Sir," she began, her voice soft and shaky, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." He said nothing at first. His eyes were calm. She continued, "I judged you by your clothes, by your silence. I was wrong." The cabin was silent. Everyone was listening. Passengers leaned closer, watching, waiting. Mr. Shah looked at her for a moment, then spoke softly. "Most people judge others to feel bigger than they are." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to be cruel." He gently nodded. "But you were." She looked down, ashamed. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know." Mr. Shah looked out the window. "Kindness is not something we show only to the powerful. It matters more when no one is watching." She wiped a tear from her cheek and walked away without another word. Passengers were whispering again. But this time, not about him. They were whispering about themselves. "I think I laughed at him too. I judged him by his shoes. I thought he didn't belong here." Everyone was quiet now. Not from fear, but from shame. A man in the back got up and walked to Mr. Shah. He looked nervous. "Sir, I took a photo of you earlier. I sent it to someone as a joke. I deleted it. I'm really sorry." Mr. Shah nodded. "Thank you for telling me." "I was wrong," the man added. "You didn't deserve that." Mr. Shah smiled slightly. "Few people deserve how they're treated, good or bad." One by one, passengers came to him. Some apologized, some thanked him, some just stood silently, then walked away. And Mr. Shah? He stayed quiet. He didn't brag. He didn't act powerful. But his silence now spoke louder than anyone else's voice. Near the front of the plane, a young businesswoman watched everything. She had been silent the whole flight. Now, she stood and walked toward him. She held a tablet. "Sir, I've worked on SkyCorps projects before," she said. "Just a small intern in a big room of engineers. But we all heard stories about you, about how you came from nothing." Mr. Shah looked at her. His face softened. "And yet here you are, speaking with strength." She smiled. "Your story inspired me. And today, you reminded me that greatness doesn't shout." The entire cabin was listening again. And then, something unexpected happened. Mr. Shah stood up. He walked to the front of the cabin. The flight attendant stepped aside, saying nothing. He turned around and looked at everyone. His voice was quiet, but strong. "You judged me when I was silent. You laughed when you thought I was weak. You smiled when I had nothing to offer. And now, you want to apologize because you know my name." He paused. "Let this moment stay with you, not because I'm a CEO, but because I was treated like I didn't matter. And I still chose peace." The cabin was frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. His words hit like a storm, quiet but unstoppable. Mr. Shah returned to seat 14C, and for the first time that flight, the silence felt different. Not awkward, not guilty, just respectful. And as the plane moved forward through the clouds, everyone knew. This flight would be remembered forever. But what they didn't know was that Mr. Shah still had one more surprise waiting. The plane had grown quiet, not a single laugh, not a single whisper. Even the flight attendants moved carefully now, like they were walking through a room full of memories. But Mr. Alam Shah, He sat still in seat 14C, looking out the window, at the clouds. No anger, no pride, only peace. But deep inside, he was thinking. Because this flight wasn't just a trip. He hadn't come on this plane by accident. There was a reason he chose to fly commercial, not private. There was a reason. He sat in economy, not first class, and that reason was about to reveal itself. Minutes earlier, inside the cockpit, the co-pilot stared at the name on the system log. Override Assistance, Alim Shah, Level 1 clearance. He turned to the captain. He's not just the CEO. He has the master override access for our plane's AI system. The captain nodded. And thank God for that. The sensor failure could have forced an emergency landing. They both looked toward the cabin door. Why would someone with that kind of power fly like this? The co-pilot whispered. Back in the cabin, passengers were still stealing glances at him. Some tried to act normal. Some were still ashamed. A few wanted selfies, but were too scared to ask. Then, Clara, the flight attendant, walked to him again. She held something in her hand. A silver envelope. "Sir," she said carefully, "this arrived for you. A staff member brought it just before takeoff, but I didn't give it to you earlier." Mr. Shah took the envelope and opened it slowly. Inside was a black card with gold letters. It said, "Confidential, Investor Inspection. Pass Flight 907, cabin crew review observation status." Active Clara's heart dropped. She looked at him. "Observation? Wait. Were you here to watch us?" Mr. Shah nodded quietly. "I sponsor this airline," he said, "and once a year, I fly without warning, to see how the crew treats those who seem to have nothing." Clara's face turned white. She stepped back, shaking. "You were testing us?" she whispered. He nodded again. "Kindness matters most when there's no reward." Passengers began whispering loudly now. "He was watching everything?" "That means, this whole time, we failed." Clara looked like she might cry. Mr. Shah stood up again. "I didn't come here to punish," he said, "but to remind." He looked at each passenger, then at the crew. Status, money, appearance, none of it means anything when a heart is unkind. He reached into his bag and took out a folder. Inside were 3 letters. One he handed to the co-pilot, one to Clara, and one to the young intern woman who had spoken kindly to him earlier. They all opened them slowly. The co-pilot's eyes widened. Clara gasped. The young woman started crying. Each letter said the same thing. Promotion approved. Position, Leadership Training Program, Sky Corps Elite. Why? Because character is greater than title. Passengers began clapping softly. The intern hugged the letter to her chest. Even Clara, shaking, broken but honest, whispered, "Thank you. I didn't deserve this, but I'll earn it." Mr. Shah gave a small smile. The plane wasn't just flying toward its destination anymore. It was flying through a change of heart. And as it soared through the clouds, everyone knew this wasn't just a flight. It was a lesson. But the biggest twist? The atmosphere on the plane had completely changed. People no longer looked at Mr. Alim Shah with judgment. Now they looked at him with respect, some even with awe. But there was still one question on everyone's mind. Why was he really here? Why did a billionaire CEO who could fly anywhere in private luxury choose this uncomfortable seat among strangers? The answer was about to change everything. Years ago, Alim Shah wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He was a young man with torn shoes and a laptop that barely worked. He sat at an airport once, just like many of the passengers on this very flight, tired, hungry, invisible. He had a small idea that could change airplane safety forever. He called it Smart Sky, an AI system that could detect problems before humans noticed them. But back then, no one listened. Until one day, a flight attendant gave him a sandwich and a kind smile. She didn't know his name. She didn't know he hadn't eaten in 2 days. But she helped anyway. That single act of kindness, it changed his life. Back to the present, Mr. Shaw stood once more at the front of the cabin. "I wasn't born into money," he said. "I've been where many of you are, looked down on, ignored." He paused, scanning the faces in front of him. "I made a promise back then, that if I ever succeeded, I would never forget what it felt like to be treated as less." Gasps filled the cabin. A woman in the back whispered, "This whole thing?" "It's personal to him." Mr. Shaw nodded as if he heard her. "I didn't come on this flight just to observe," he said. "I came because this plane, this company, is built on one idea, that people matter, even when no one sees them." He turned to Clara and the other crew members. "You are the face of this company. How you treat one person, just one, can change everything. For better or worse." Passengers were nodding now, some with tears in their eyes. A young man called out, "You changed how I see people today, sir." "I'll never forget it." Mr. Shaw smiled. "Then my journey was worth it." Just then, the captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been given early landing clearance. On behalf of our airline, and especially Mr. Shaw, we thank you for flying with us today." Applause broke out. But it wasn't for the pilot. It was for the man in seat 14C. The same man who had been mocked, ignored, judged. Now, he was the reason hearts were changed. As the plane descended, one last surprise was waiting. Mr. Shaw turned to the kind intern, the one who spoke up earlier. He handed her a small silver card. She looked down at it. Her hands began to shake. Personal. Mentor Access. Aleem Shah. "Welcome to Sky Corps' Future Leaders Program." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Why me?" He smiled gently. "Because you showed courage when others stayed quiet." As the wheels touched the ground, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a flight. It was a story of second chances, quiet power, and the truth that the smallest actions can leave the biggest impact. But the world didn't know yet what just happened, because when they stepped off that plane, everything would go public. The plane landed smoothly at the airport. Passengers unbuckled their seatbelts, still quiet, still thinking. No one rushed to stand up. No one fought over bags. They looked at each other with new eyes. Some were ashamed. Some were proud. All were changed. And at the center of it all, Mr. Aleem Shah, sitting calmly in seat 14C. He stood up slowly, picked up his small bag, and nodded to the crew. But before he could walk out, phones buzzed, notifications popped up, news alerts flashed across screens. Breaking: billionaire CEO Aleem Shah spotted on commercial flight, uncovers truth about airline culture. Hero in economy class? Man who saved flight was the plane's creator. Flight attendant mocked him. Now she's being promoted by the same man. Passengers looked around, stunned. The story had gone viral in minutes. Clara, the flight attendant, stepped back, shocked. "It's already online?" Mr. Shah simply nodded. The truth always finds a way. Outside the airport, reporters had gathered, cameras flashed, news vans surrounded the terminal. But Mr. Shah didn't walk out through the VIP gate. He walked out through the same door as everyone else. Passengers shielded him at first, trying to protect his privacy, but he raised a hand and spoke quietly. "I came as a stranger. I leave as a reminder." Reporters shouted questions. "Is this a publicity stunt? Why fly economy? Are you punishing the airline?" He replied with only one sentence. "Respect should never depend on appearance." And with that, He walked toward a simple black car. No bodyguards, no special service, just a man with a heart full of lessons and a world now watching. Later that evening, the story exploded across the internet. Social media was flooded. I'll never judge someone by their clothes again. Mr. Shah is the kind of leader we need. I cried watching this story. Humanity still exists. Airlines around the world began retraining their staff. News outlets covered it as a wake-up call to industries everywhere. One passenger wrote a blog titled, "I sat near a nobody. He turned out to be everybody's reminder." And Clara, she didn't hide. She wrote a public apology. "I mocked a man I didn't know. That man saved us, forgave me, and taught the world a lesson. I will never forget it." Back in his office, Mr. Shah sat at his desk, looking out the window at the night sky. He picked up an old photo, himself as a young man, sitting alone in an airport, hungry and tired. He smiled softly. That boy had once been invisible. Now, his voice had reached the world, but he didn't care about fame. He cared about change, and the next morning, he boarded another flight, another random route, another chance to remind the world that the quietest person in the room might just be the one who changes it. 1 week had passed. The internet was still buzzing with his story. News outlets called him the billionaire in seat 14C. People everywhere were sharing the lesson. Never judge someone by how they look. Kindness matters, always. But Mr. Alim Shah didn't stay in the spotlight. He had no interest in interviews or awards. He had already moved on. Another airport. Another flight. A cold morning. Another busy terminal. Mr. Shah sat alone again, this time in a simple gray hoodie, jeans, and old sneakers. No one recognized him. He liked it that way. He boarded the plane quietly and took his seat, this time 22A near the back. But something felt different. The flight crew greeted him with warm smiles. A young stewardess brought him water without asking. An older man helped him with his bag. Kindness. Without knowing who he was, he noticed it. He appreciated it. But he said nothing. 2 rows behind, a teenage boy kept staring at Mr. Shah. He leaned toward his mother and whispered, "Mom, I think that's him." His mother shook her head. "That's just a regular man, sweetheart." But the boy wasn't sure. He pulled out his phone and looked at the viral photo from last week. Same eyes, same calm face. It was him. Mid-flight. The boy stood up, walked to Mr. Shah, and gently said, "Sir, I know who you are." Mr. Shah looked up, surprised, but kind. "I read everything. Your story, the flight, what you said to the world. It changed how I think about people." Mr. Shah smiled. The boy continued, "I used to make fun of quiet kids in school. After watching your story, I apologized to one of them." There was a pause. "Thank you," the boy whispered. Mr. Shah nodded. "That's all I ever wanted." The boy returned to his seat, eyes shining. Mr. Shah turned to the window, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to smile fully when the plane landed. Mr. Shah waited as others got off. When he stood, the flight attendant stopped him. "Sir," she said gently, "I don't know if it's true, but someone said you're Mr. Shah." He raised an eyebrow. "And if I am?" She smiled. "Then, thank you. Because ever since your flight, our training changed. Our hearts changed." She reached into her pocket and handed him a small paper note. He unfolded it. It read, "One kind person can fix what 10 cruel ones break." A grateful crew member, Mr. Shah nodded, folded the note, and walked off the plane quietly.